Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. I am here today to do a Friday Reads video. I usually do this every week, but there have been two instances where I missed recently, and one of them was last week. Just lots of stuff going on, family-wise, holiday-wise, and all of that stuff. I had really thought that on Friday after Thanksgiving, I would have a chance to record a video, and just didn't. So I'm sorry. I apologize for the break. We have a lot to talk about because I did finish two books. One of them I would have finished in time for my last Friday Reads video. The other one I finished on the last day of November. So I figured, since this is also the beginning of December and I haven't done a wrap up for November, I'm going to do a Friday Reads and a November reading wrap up and a little bit of a look ahead to December and what I am planning on doing next and want to fit in before the end of the year. Just a little bit of that because it's crunch time. We gotta get things going. It's bizarre to be at the end of the year. It feels kind of fast, but here we are. It's really here. The only thing I will talk about before we get into the Friday Reads and then before we get into the wrap up and the look ahead is that we started watching the Great Soul Food Cook-Off, which is on Discovery Plus, and it's a really good show if you have access to that. I don't know if it's on Food Network or if it's on a different channel, but I know it's on Discovery Plus, and it's a really good channel. It has an all-black cast of contestants, all-black judges, and it really talks about the history of soul food in this country. It talks about the legacies of slavery and trauma and racism in this country and the ways in which all of the contestants and judges have dealt with it. It is a very surprisingly emotional show for a cooking competition, and that's also kind of refreshing that it has this perspective and focus. So I've really been enjoying that. Plus, soul food, you really can't go wrong. So I would definitely recommend checking that out. We've also watched a bunch of movies. I am still thinking about whether or not I'm going to do a specific video of the book versus the movie of Passing, because we did watch the movie and it was great. I'll talk about Passing when I do my November wrap up because I did finish that. Same with The Power of the Dog because we did, I finished the book. We're going to hope to watch the movie this weekend. So that will be coming. We watched Tick, Tick, Boom, which is on Netflix. I really enjoyed that. I think Joel was a little more middling on it than I was, but I really liked that a lot. It's directed by Lin-Manuel Miranda about the life of Jonathan Larsen, based on the musical that he did just before he did Rent, which is obviously what made him famous, and he died, I think, the day before Rent opened on Broadway. So that was a really interesting movie, and all three of those are actually on Netflix. So if you would like to check them out, The Great British Bake Off is over. No spoilers. I won't ruin it for anybody who is catching up. There was I think a shocking development in the week before the final episode. And then but the final four was really solid. It's probably the best top three and even top four that they've had in any season, which says a lot. And I'm looking forward to the holiday edition, which I think is released today. So that's other stuff that's been going on. The news has been stressing me out, and all I really have to say about it now is that I wore this t-shirt for a reason, and I'm going to let it do the talking for me. And of course, there's a new variant out there. It's a lot. So I hope you're staying safe. You are coping with the news and any anxiety you might have about it. If you do, it's totally understandable. We're all working to get through it. So hopefully you are managing and coping in a healthy way. So I'm going to skip a 3K Q&A question for this week. I only have one left, and I'm trying to decide if I'm going to roll some of the questions that I got about having a BookTube channel into Friday Reads videos as well, because the video I'm preparing for that, I'm still working on it, believe it or not, is turning out to be a little long. So if I need to save time, I'm going to fold them into Friday Reads videos, and we'll do it that way, but we'll see. I'm almost done with the prep for it, so hopefully I'll be filming it next week, but we'll see how that goes. Let's get into the Friday Reads portion of this video. And then after that, we can get into the November wrap-up. And really, the Friday Reads is part of my November wrap-up because both of these books were finished in the month of November. I have not done a great job reading since November 30th. It is now December 3rd. I have not picked up the print book that I'm supposed to be reading. I've made very slow progress in the audio that I started. we'll talk about it. The news has got me down, just a lot of stuff going on with family, so I definitely slowed down again. I feel like I had just gotten myself out of a slump, and I'm kind of on the precipice of sliding back, but I'm going to work on this because it's the end of the year. We gotta get going. But let's talk about the books that I finished. The first one was The Charm Offensive by Alison Cochrun. I listened to this on audio. It was a recommendation from Abby at the Montana Book Company because she said it's pure cinnamon bun magic. And it sure is. And not only is it a kind of really cute romance novel, especially a gay romance novel, it deals with mental health, which is really interesting to see playing out in a romance. And it makes it a really sweet story as well, because you have these characters, Dev and Charlie. Dev struggles with depression, Charlie struggles with anxiety. And you see the ways in which they struggle with these and with the ways that they inhibit their lives and the way in which they are sort of perfect for each other because they understand each other, they really see each other, they don't give up when the other person is in a bit of a moment of despair. It just makes it really, really cute. And it talks about these issues in, I think, a really good and healthy way. And it's interesting that I ended up enjoying the book because the premise of it doesn't quite work. And yet the book works. I'll explain. So Dev works for a TV show, a reality competition show, very similar to The Bachelor. But the twist is Dev really believes in love, and he is a sort of a hopeless romantic, so he loves being on the show and what he thinks helping people find their true love. But that doesn't really work because obviously the show is completely manipulated and he is part of those manipulations. So the way it turns out, you can kind of see that Dev goes along because he thinks this is the best he can do. That was part of his depression. He settles for things. So as much as the reality of the show is not his hopeless romantic ideal, he thinks it's the best that anyone can do. And he goes along in the hopes that people are going to find their true love. But it still doesn't quite work. Charlie, who struggles with anxiety, has just suffered a setback in his career within the tech world, and his friend Parisa convinces him that in order to rehab his image, he can go on the show, and once he has rehabbed his image, he can get back into the tech world and the company that he helped found, and everything will be fine. That doesn't quite make sense. I don't know why this Bachelor-ish reality competition would help his image. And no spoilers, there may have been an ulterior motive later that kind of explains why he was encouraged to do the show. But again, the moment you really start thinking about it, it doesn't make sense. So the book is set on the most flimsy of premises. And yet it really works because Charlie and Dev are just really great characters and their chemistry together is palpable. And the way Alison Cochrun has the plot turn out is interesting because Dev ends up being Charlie's handler on the show because there's this immediate spark between them of trust. And as the show is filmed, their relationship deepens. And it's really cute. But again, even the lead up to the finale of the book is a premise that is extremely flimsy, and yet it pays off somehow. So it's interesting that in both of those cases, with the premise of the book and the heading into the finale, it shouldn't work. And yet Alison Cochrun manages to make it enjoyable. I enjoyed this book, and I would recommend it if you are into romance. It's just one of those inexplicable things where it's like, this shouldn't work, but it does. And the fact that it does almost makes it even more enjoyable. I don't think it will be on my favorite books of the year, but it was a great book for right now. It was an enjoyable read. Like I said, I would recommend it to you if you're interested in it. So definitely think about checking that one out. The audio was great. The other book that I finished right under the wire for the month of November was The Power of the Dog by Thomas Savage with a foreword by Annie Proulx. An afterword by Annie Proulx. I didn't get to read it until the end because I didn't want any spoilers for the book itself. Now, I understand the movie is just released this week on Netflix. A lot of people don't want spoilers, so I am not going to get into spoilers. I will talk about the premise of the book and a little bit of my thoughts about it, but I'm going to hold on anything deeper. Once I have watched the movie, I would like to do a book versus movie comparison because I think this would be a really fascinating subject for one of those. But My ability to do bigger projects like that has been a little bit strained recently, so I don't want to make any promises. So, point being, no spoilers. Now, this book was originally published, I want to say, in 1968. Let's take a look at the copyright date to make sure I'm getting that right. Copyright 1967 by Thomas Savage. He seems to be a writer who was fairly popular in his time, but who was largely forgotten over. It seems like one of those situations where those who know. Annie Proulx clearly knew, because this is an edition that was republished in the early 2000s, and that is where her Afterward came from. Yeah, Afterward, copyright 2001. So it's for an edition that was published around then. And what's really brought it back into prominence is the movie adaptation by Jane Campion, starring Benedict Cumberbatch and Kirsten Dunst. So we have this sort of forgotten classic that is coming back, and I always love to see that. And what's really interesting about this book is that it does what I really appreciated about Lonesome Dove. It sort of uses the Western genre as its format a little bit, because it's set in the 1900s, so people drive cars. But it's really subverting what the Western is and what the Western can do. And it's deliberately questioning the Western genre and all of the things that it celebrates. It's almost about toxic masculinity in a way, and how damaging that can be. But I don't want to get too far into it. The premise of the book is that you have two brothers, Phil Burbank and George Burbank. They are running a ranch in the early 1900s in Montana. They have been doing this basically their whole lives. In the beginning of the book, they go on a cattle drive to sell some of their cattle in a nearby town, and Phil is excited about this because it is the 25th anniversary of them doing this drive together. So there's also time is like a huge theme ongoing in the book, and how things change. And I think that's one of the smart things that Thomas Savage does by setting this as a sort of Western, but in the 1920s, because people are driving cars, people aren't really driving horses anymore. So you can see the Western world is dying away and times are changing. And there are a lot of people who are very concerned about things like that. And that passage of time really gets to Phil because he's very comfortable with the way things have been. Their parents, who owned the ranch, used to be socialites from, I believe, Boston. Definitely on the East Coast in New England. I believe it's Boston. And they relocated to this ranch in Montana. It's not quite clear why. And they eventually had a sort of altercation with Phil that's not really, it never really explains what the altercation was, but they removed themselves and went to Salt Lake City. So they're not quite in the picture anymore. It's just Phil and George. They are the people on this ranch. And things are progressing. They sleep in the same beds that they did as children, in the same room. They share a bedroom as adults. Phil is now 40, and it's just the way that they are. And Phil is comfortable with that. Phil is this very, very intelligent, very brutal sort of man, unforgiving. He is particularly unforgiving of what he would call sissies and things like that. George is a very kind man, not a very smart man. And I think that's one flaw of the book. It feels like Phil and George should be on a more even playing field. It almost feels unfair that Phil is the smart one and George is not, because this book is very much about decency and cruelty. And Phil is obviously the cruel one. Phil is obviously the cruel one. George is the decent one. So it seems a little uneven that Phil is so smart and George is, he's not dumb. He has a good memory. He is capable of handling some of the business end of but he's not as smart as Phil. So there's a bit of an imbalance there, and I'm going to think about that a little bit more and what that imbalance means. But anyway, point being, George all of a sudden gets married to a widow in the town nearby who has a son. And Phil is not happy about this. So when the widow moves in, Phil sets out to destroy her, basically, in very subtle ways, sort of passive-aggressive ways. Sort of he needles her and causes a lot of damage to her. And that's all I'm going to say about the premise of the book. That's everything that happens in like the first 50 to 75 pages of the book. From there, I'll let you discover it if you want to go see the movie. I will say it is a really good book. I ended up taking notes. I don't take notes for every book that I read anymore. I filled 2 index cards with notes and had a bunch of different things that I was tracking throughout the book. What I will say, and I don't think this is too much of a spoiler, is that this book also deals with homosexuality, and in very interesting ways and in very subtle ways. And Annie Proulx actually talks in the afterword about how it's interesting that in all of the criticism of this book, most people avoid that conversation completely when there's pretty heavy evidence that that's what's going on in this book. So I'm just going to put that out there. So I don't know if the movie is overt about those things. I imagine it would be, because I don't think Jane Campion would shy away from that aspect of the book. But it's this really great way of deepening the conversation about masculinity and toxicity and what it is to be a good person and what it is to live your life on your own terms. I enjoyed this. I don't want to talk too much about it because, like I said, I want people to be able to enjoy the movie on their own terms, if that is what they would like to do. And I'm looking forward to seeing the movie. I've heard really good things about it. I think Jane Campion is a fascinating director to work on this project. So I'm really looking forward to watching that. And once I do, I might talk about this a little bit more. But I hope that whet your appetite for this. So let's finish the Friday reads a little bit. I had done a poll on Instagram about 2 different Margaret Atwood books that I should read, Oryx and Crake and Blind Assassin, because for Montana Book Company's reading checklist for 2021, I need to read a Margaret Atwood book. That is one of the last challenges I have left. And both of those books have been on my shelves, on my TBR for a very long time. So I would like it to be one of them. I kind of thought the winner was going to be Oryx and Crake because it seems like people talk about that book more, but I guess it's more of a cult niche favorite within the world of Margaret Atwood, because The Blind Assassin handily won. Unfortunately, both books were immediately available the day I put the poll up on Instagram, in my Instagram stories. The next day, someone had checked out The Blind Assassin. So that's still going to be to come, because I'm going to wait for it. It's the book that won the poll. Thank you to anyone who voted. But unfortunately, now I have to wait. So it's been a week. Hopefully in another week, I will have access to The Blind Assassin and I can work on that. But since it wasn't immediately available, I was scrolling through options and wanted something kind of short. And I saw Chouette by Claire Oshetsky was available on Scribd. The audio is about 6 hours. Chelsea from the Montana Book Company raved about this book recently. She talked about how it is her favorite read of 2021. And it sounds like a bizarre book, but Chelsea is also the person who recommended like a love story to me. I trust her. And I feel like I'm ready for a sort of bizarre book, something that's going to make me think. Most of my reading in 2021 has been sort of comfort reading. I've defaulted to that a lot for obvious reasons. But I felt up for a challenge. And I'm always curious as to what people say is their favorite book. So the fact that she said this was her favorite book of the year made me very curious. So I started listening to this. I have not progressed very much because, again, of all the things that have been going on. I think as of right now, I'm 30% of the way in. Hopefully, I'll be done by this weekend, but we'll see. I'm going to read you the description of this just so you get a sense of what this is about, because it's kind of difficult to explain. Tiny is pregnant. Her husband is delighted. You think this baby is going to be like you, but it's not like you at all, she warns him. This baby is an owl baby. When Chouette is born, small and broken-winged, Tiny works around the clock to meet her daughter's needs. Left on her own to care for a child who seems more predatory bird than baby, Tiny vows to raise Chouette to be her authentic self. Even in those times when Chouette's behaviors grow violent and strange, Tiny's loving commitment to her daughter is unwavering. When she discovers that her husband is on an obsessive and increasingly dangerous quest to find a cure for their daughter, Tiny must decide whether Chouette should be raised to fit in or to be herself and learn what it truly means to be a mother. Arresting, darkly funny, and unsettling, Chouette is a brilliant exploration of ambition, sacrifice, perceptions of ability, and the ferocity of motherly love. And I think it's interesting that this is very much about like ability and what it is to be the parent of a child who is different from other people. You can see it mentions perceptions of ability there. And one thing that Chelsea talked about is that it definitely has a queer angle to it and what it is like to raise a queer child. It's going to be interesting to see how that ties in with the idea that Chouette occasionally has like violent and strange behavior. But so far, the writing is really good. The book is a little bizarre, especially since the book opens with this woman, Tiny. I didn't even realize her name was Tiny until I saw the description. She has a fling with her owl lover. So this book kind of uses magical realism as well, which is another reason it seems very bizarre. She has a fling with her owl lover, who is female, and not only does she have a fling with an owl and end up pregnant, she has a fling with a female owl and becomes pregnant. So you can tell it's a bizarre book, but I am enjoying it so far. And I'm looking forward to the next 70% of the book and seeing what it is like in the end. It also has a beautiful cover. I looked at this when we were in Montana Book Company for Small Business Saturday. It looks even more beautiful in person. The cover is textured, so it has this really nice feel to it when you pick it up. And I love the idea of reading something that not a lot of people are reading. It's something that is not mainstream popular, because a lot of my reading this year has been that as well. So I love the idea of getting out of that a little bit and finding something that is a little lesser known. So I'm enjoying it so far. And its strangeness is very refreshing. And it's well written, and we'll see how it goes. So that's what I've been kind of working on the side. I'm supposed to be starting Work Like Any Other by Virginia Reeves. I've only made it one page in. Every time I pick it up, I feel tired and like I'm not really quite able to pay attention, which is another reason I've made only slow progress on Chouette so far. So this is going to be my next physical book. I'm going to try to really dive into it this week, because the last books that I need to read are The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood, this one, and Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin. And that is also going to be a physical book. So I need to get this one out of the way so I can make sure I finish James Baldwin in the month of December, because I've been much slower with physical books this year than I have been with audios. So I'm going to try to get both of those done. And that's all I need to read in the year. That's kind of the look ahead for this video. I have access to the love songs of W.E.B. Du Bois on audio now. So obviously I'm going to finish Chouette on audio. I am going to do The Blind Assassin. Hopefully it will be available by the time I finish Chouette. And then I want to try to get to the love songs of W.E.B. Du Bois before the end of the year. It's a 30-hour audio. So I'm going to cap it at that and say that if I finish all of that in December, it's going to be good. Let's do a bit of a recap of anything else that I read in the month of November. So obviously I finished the month with The Charm Offensive and The Power of the Dog. I started the month by getting out of my slump and finishing the book Taste My Life Through Food by Stanley Tucci. Really enjoyed this. It was the perfect book to get me out of a slump. Stanley Tucci is an incredibly charming person, and that really comes across on the page. He definitely pulled me out of the reading slump that I had been in and got me back into the reading world. So I am very grateful to this book, and I enjoyed it a lot. I love the idea of memoirs told through food and talking about politics through the lens of food and things like that. It's something that has really interested me in recent years. So that was the first book that I finished in the month of November. The next book that I finished was Aristotle and Dante Dive into the Waters of the World. I had started this on audio in October, and then I hit my reading slump. So I kind of stopped. And then once I got back into reading, I went back to it and finished it. And I'm really glad I did, because I loved this book a lot. It basically is compassion in book form. It seems like it talks about the world in ways that are unrealistic, and that it's sort of very ideal terms. I think what I like about it so much is that that's the way I like to think about the world, where people are really trying and understanding and doing the best that they can. So I really enjoyed this, and I would definitely recommend it. And I'm very glad that I did manage to finish it. And then I did the audio of Passing by Nella Larsen, which I also loved. I love how ambiguous the book is. It doesn't give you a lot of answers. It lets you kind of decide things for yourself. And one thing that was really strong about the movie is that it does the same thing. So if I have time, I'll do more of a book to movie, although they're very similar. Point being, if I have a little bit of time, I might expand on that a little bit, but they really play well together. And that's everything, because then the next book that I finished was The Charm Offensive, and then went on to The Power of the Dog. So that's how my November went. That's how my reading went the last 2 weeks since I've done my last Friday Reads video. And I'd love to hear what you've been up to, what you've been reading, what you've been watching, anything like that. Please let me know in the comment section down below. If you have things that you're going to try to fit in before the end of the year, please let me know in the comment section down below as well. And as always, I really appreciate your time. Again, I am sorry that I missed a video last week. I occasionally get comments from people who say that they love spending Saturday mornings with me when I post these videos, and that really does mean a lot to me. So I'm sorry. I feel really guilty when I miss a Saturday morning, so I apologize for that. Anyway, thank you for your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.